Welcome to the first video of this video series. In this video, I will address the challenge of developing a research project and getting it through the publication process, especially in international journals. For scholars in the Global South, beyond the North American and European centers of academic publication, scholarship, and the gatekeeping, it is particularly challenging to navigate the process of publication, but also challenging to create a viable project and present that project in a way that the international audience will understand. There are many political, geopolitical kinds of barriers, and there are logistical, practical, pragmatic barriers. So in this video, I'd like to address some of the pragmatic ways in which we can overcome these big barriers without getting too bogged down by the challenges, but also without going too far and only trying to address practically what's really a much larger social challenge. The barriers include language challenges and technical jargon that may not be similar in different countries. You may be writing in language that, even after translation, does not make a lot of sense for a person in another country. How do we get to this international discourse where the problem is not really translation, but the problem is the style, the jargon, the approach to presenting ideas. And then there may be barriers of financial constraints, such as acquiring and accessing resources, paying for publication. We may have limited access to scholarship. And not only that, we may have limited access to the network of scholars so that we can collaborate and understand the larger culture of publication. And then we have the lack of exposure and mentorship with the peers and collaborators in the global north, so that we are able to navigate the editorial and gatekeeping process, the review process, with full understanding. Not to mention that there is this bias and prejudice in the editorial and review process that people, the scholars from outside the center, can also have strong, meaningful, purposeful research and publication. The bias may come from the disregard that a lot of international journals, their editors and reviewers have for local issues and local needs of different countries. They might not realize what they think is global international issues is actually their own local interest. So if the person who is running the journal lives in a cold climate, they're not going to really appreciate the challenges of heat written by scholars in hotter climate. If they don't grow potatoes, then maybe they won't understand the need to address the disease in potatoes. If they don't have landslides, they may not understand the need to address the landslide in road construction. If they don't have malaria, then maybe malaria is not something that they would think is a high priority issue. So these things come from both ignorance and attitude of the people. So how do we navigate that, right? And not to mention, there's also the digital divide of access to the internet or databases and access to devices or software and hardware. And finally, the cultural and contextual difference of how research is done, the methods are used, what kind of citations are done in your writing. And the global North produce theory and methods are also a barrier, because for the people in the global North, the centers of research and publication and gatekeeping, certain theories may look like, oh, these are universal ways of looking at something, but they may not be. And therefore, when a scholar from outside tries to present a theory or a method or an issue or a context or a research project that is meaningful, valuable, purposeful in their context, the international folks may not understand. And there may be difference in ethical standards. So we could go on and on and on and on about the challenges. But the focus of this workshop is not to focus on the challenges, but to tackle the challenge, to overcome the challenge in practical ways as we can. In order to advance the research that is meaningful and valuable for our own context, we need to find practical ways of both addressing the global audience and creating valuable research from our end. One of the ways to do that would be to learn how to look at it from both directions. One direction is look at the local research from your perspective and create value for the global. The other direction is look at the global discourse, research, methods, journals, conversation right now. And when you're reading and understanding that global context discourse, you may begin to learn, realize how to develop your local research. So it's a two-way traffic. It's not a one-way traffic. A person who is, perfectly capable of producing research locally has no understanding of the global discourse or the process or the expectations will struggle. And a person who is simply trying to address the global and make people happy on the global international scale may not be doing meaningful research on the ground up. So it's a matter of bringing both up in ways that make sense to each other. How do you do that? I think let's get into some of the details here. How do you do that? One is to have a long-term research goal so that you have a much bigger research agenda that will produce smaller projects within that bigger research agenda. For example, I am an expert on international education. So I have published books and articles and chapters on international education. Sometimes I address the history, sometimes I address the practical challenges, sometimes teaching and learning. So that is how a scholar can develop a stronger, bigger base on which they can stand and produce more concrete research. Without that stronger, bigger, long-term basis, it is hard to produce meaningful, interesting, purposeful, specific journal articles. And that is most useful when you have something that is locally meaningful and impactful, because that will inspire you, that will give you a reason to do it, right? That will create value in local context and institution. But again, as I said a moment ago, the challenge is to create a locally impactful research that has global relevance. In order to create global relevance, you need to study the issue globally, the larger, broader issue globally, so the specific topic within that issue is locally meaningful and purposeful and impactful. And the way to do that is to offer local perspective or evidence for the global issue. For example, if heat has become an extremely important topic across the world, how are towns and communities and farmers or animals grappling with this heat, right? How do we avoid the challenges? How do we manage the challenges? So that if it is interesting globally, then the local case, the local example, local evidence, local perspective, local understanding, local history may be interesting to the global readers. So always think about how you can contribute uniquely to global discourse, how you can contribute new cases, new evidences, new perspectives, so that once you connect the global and the local, it's easier to communicate with the international venues. Don't be afraid to show the global relevance of the local evidence. Don't be afraid to highlight the unique contributions that you will have in your introduction, in your discussion, in your literature review. Show what the contribution is. That you can do that by showing gaps in the international discourse, by framing your presentation in international terms, by showcasing new kinds of approaches, by linking the local to global challenges again. Sometimes you can compare between what is happening and what is true in your case with other cases that were reported in the global literature before from other countries. And always draw broader inferences, meanings out of the local data or findings. And then implications in theoretical terms may also be presented in global terms, universal terms. That may help you to either challenge or advance the existing broader discourse. To add one or two more things about how to do that, one is by reading. Read the global literature on the subject. And as I said, when you read the subject, you may realize, aha, this is how I need to design my project. When you're designing a project, then think about how do I contribute to the global discourse. So it's a two-way traffic. There are priorities that you can feel when you're reading. Like sometimes people may be prioritizing disease in crops or cost in infrastructure development or student-centered learning in education or pandemic in medicine. So what is the priority? A topic may look really interesting and very, very important at the local scale, but if it is not going to be interesting on a priority scale for the global audience, maybe you will need to rethink that or learn how to establish your local research within global priority. And the other thing is also understanding that the global audience has different expectations, different understanding, different backgrounds. That is seen sometimes in journal expectations. What do they expect about theory, about methods, about contextualization, about review? Sometimes global audience is translated into the particular journal's particular shape of the article, particular structure of the article. And one of the ways in which, when you're writing, is to be careful and to be clear. Don't assume that people understand local references. Define your terms, describe your context, unpack your assumptions. And if you do that, you are going to be clearer. You have to imagine that someone is going to Costa Rica for the first time, or you're going to Japan for the first time, and you're trying to describe what you're describing to a person from a very different context. The moment you can imagine that you're not talking to your colleague in the same town, but rather talking to someone in London or someone in New York, the moment you imagine, the writing gets easier to make things clear. It doesn't mean that you dumb it down. It just means you clarify and unpack. And that can be done if you can find someone in a different country to give you feedback before you submit your publication. So these are some of the ways in which you practically translate how to establish local value with for global relevance. One last thing that I'll say in this video is if you do not value the local relevance and significance and need and purpose of research, you will probably not publish strong international publications because people in the international journals, editors, reviewers, sometimes they're seen as people who do not want to hear anything new. Maybe half of the people are like that. But if you run from your own local context and try to create value by simply joining the global conversation, you're less likely to compete with other people publishing in that venue. You're more likely to get a chance if you value who you are, where you are, and what you are doing, and what your local community or profession or institution or society needs. The trick is you should be able to stand on your own feet, on your own ground, and build and establish something of value for others. It is not either or. So let me give you an example. If you go to this link and read the op-ed that I wrote a few years ago, I describe a farmer who recognizes a problem in his garden. He's actually not even a full-fledged farmer, but a gardener in the backyard. And he notices that people are using a lot of poison to control the pests or chemicals to make the garden vegetables grow. So he started finding ways in which he can avoid doing that. So he will not pollute the local river. He will not feed chemicals to his children. But he does that in a scientific way. After he notices the problem and the issue, he develops an objective. And he thinks, okay, I have two objectives: reduce poison and reduce chemicals that would also not be necessary to fertilize and make the plants grow. Then the significance of that is much bigger. He may look at the global literature, he may read in the newspaper, he may read somewhere in a journal that farmers and gardeners around the world are heavily depending on very easy and quick methods of fertilizing and quick methods of killing the pests. So that has become a global crisis. Now, if you connect with that global crisis, right, of use of poisons and chemicals, and then start doing this local level observation of the garden as how to develop new alternatives, flowers, spices, different kinds of cross planting, and feeding the plants with organic matter so that they are resilient, planting the right type of crops at the right time and weather, and those methods of the natural organic methods that avoid using pesticide and fertilizers, then that is the sort of new method that the farmer is developing. But then if you study that method in the methodology of other people, let's say he goes to another farmer, let's say he reads a journal that is published in local farmer's manual. Let's say he goes to a discussion in the community. See how that farmer's work is very scientific, if you think about it, how that is scholarship or science or method or research grows from the ground up, right? So if you look carefully at how that farmer may document the learning process, they may document the development of a hypothesis or argument, may track his method of doing things and learn about how other people have done it in the past. That begins to look like literature review, methodology, data collection, data analysis, discussion of data, lab, experimentation. And once he begins to report the findings in his own journal and then in the local newspaper and presenting at the local community center, you will see that he is taking what we do as scientists and scholars, right? So those implications may then, as you read this article, you will see that those implications may then become part of a grant proposal. They may be published, and this person may become an expert. So the moment you begin to see research as normal, research as having a social need and purpose, that motivation will drive you to become a researcher, to solve a local problem, and give knowledge to the global community. You should not look at this as a game where you run away from local reality in order to find a global discourse and go there and contribute. That's not going to work. It will also not work if you simply write something in local language and local terms, and then you ask somebody else to translate. Translation is not going to get you to international publication. International publication is understanding the global audience, the global discourse, the global methodology, global theories, but connecting that with the local reality, local research, local data, local findings, and then creating value out of that. In the rest of this video series, I'm going to explain step by step how do we outline research with that understanding of the local global tension, the challenges for the international scholar to publish in international journals. Then after outlining, we'll go into doing the literature review in order to carry out that local global navigation. And then after that, we'll go into how to draft the method with that understanding for the international reader, and then drafting the findings and drafting the discussions. We'll also go a little deeper into developing the theoretical framing or contribution through the discussion. And finally, maybe drafting the introduction and conclusion. I will also have a video on how to go through the publication process in international journals, how to find journals, and how to navigate the process of publication. Thank you very much for watching this first video. I hope you learned something out of it. Along with this video, there are reading materials and activities for you to do. And if you're prepared with this video to come to the workshop, to present your own draft, your own outline, this workshop series will be effective. Thank you. Gracias.